gentleman has been carving wood or working with wood since, well, pretty much I was the age of 6, so well over 45 years ago. But since 1976, he's been working with wood and carving and making, inspiring other people. And you know, he's got over 300 pieces in private collections throughout the world. My guest today, James Mellick. James, welcome to the Red, White, and You Show.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So interesting when I saw your project, and of course, we're talking about the Wounded Warrior Dog Project. Come across social media, but I was like, we have to reach out to you. We've had other artists on as well, but it's interesting to me, like when you come across an artist, why they work with the medium they do. But if you could, for the listeners and viewers, could you share a little bit who James Mellick is and kind of how you got into carving and all that?
Sure. I'm one of 5 boys born to a minister's son, and 2 of my oldest brother was a lifetimer in the Marines, and my next brother down ended up with his PhD in philosophy, but he ended up dying of cancer at the age of 39. I was the middle born, sort of the peacekeeper, and then I have 2 younger brothers who turned out to be doctors, medical doctors, and through the Army Medical Corps, and then they went on to their specialties within their field. So I do have some veterans. I am not a veteran personally, but I do have 3 veterans in my family. My father was sort of the leader in the compassion and in the idea realm of things, whereas, and of course, my mother, the supportive preacher's wife, long suffering with 5 boys, was the one who actually she made a lot of her own furniture in the house, and so she was sort of the woodworker side of it. I started out as a painter, but in the early 70s, I had a minor in sculpture, but I went to teach in New Hampshire, and that was a lot of wood up in New Hampshire, and so that sort of led me into sculpture, and I have been carving and telling stories with my carvings ever since.
Interesting. I love how you say that you've been telling your stories through wood, and everybody using a platform or a medium, if you will, to tell a story or to. So, you have so many different programs or projects that you're working on, but of course we want to focus on one, the Wounded Warrior Dog Project. And so share with us a little bit what the project is and kind of what's been going on with it.
Well, beginning in 1985, I began making statements about the human condition, in a kind way through the dog, since the dog is man's best friend. And the idea is if the dogs could talk, they would have a lot to tell about us. And so I decided as a form of allegory, I would do a dog like tell the story about Da Vinci with Da Vinci's dog, and Darwin about Darwin's dog. They were more whimsical. They were a lot of very humorous and like the politically incorrect dog. You can find those on my website. But they had more humor. But it wasn't until 2015 that I had been seeing these veterans coming home from the global war on terror, from Iraq, and then more so from Afghanistan, with these terrible injuries caused by the IEDs. And at the same time, there were some problems going on with the veterans' hospitals, and there seemed like a lack of attention given to TBI, to the PTSD, and I just this was a volunteer army. It wasn't like in the Vietnam situation, but and because during the Vietnam War, all my generation, we were very much aware of the war going on, and that occupied politically, that occupied so much of our space, one way or the other. Whereas in the recent wars, our stock market was still flush. We were still doing great. Our economy, we were going to movies. Our life did not skip a beat. Here come these men and women who came home with extensive injuries And my thought is that they're probably coming home with greater amputations, greater injuries because of the improved triage in the field and the medical technology that took place. And whereas in the Vietnam era, they probably would not have made it home. But yet I see these guys and gals walking around on prosthetics, multiple amputations sometime. And I said, I don't want these people to be forgotten. And so this is sort of my payback. And in the payback and in my thank you, I expanded it back to my own generation of the Vietnam dog handlers, which, by the way, the Vietnam dog handlers had made me an RA member of their group. So
nice. Congratulations.
Just for the stories and, reminding people, a lot of people weren't even aware that dogs are used in the military. And so my main motivation, though, was to bring, in a kind way, bring attention to the needs of our wounded veterans. And I began with the physical wounds that were the visible ones, but so many people asked me about the psychological wounds, and I said, how do I describe that? It's a wound that you can't see. And so I did one which I'll share a picture with you about a dog with two doves on the back, a black dove and a white dove facing each other up, sort of a bipolar, it's called flashback with these two conflicting spirits on
right.
the back. So that's when I got into the realm of beyond the physical injuries themselves. Now the dogs themselves, each dog has a ribbon on his collar which represents the conflict that it was in, and the wood color, the type of wood that I'm using matches the breed of the dog very often, and the breed of the dog matches the war. So that during the World War II in the South Pacific, there was a lot of Dobermans were being used at that time, and that's how the Doberman breed shows up in my work. Of course, then the German Shepherd during the Vietnam era, and then the combination of the German Shepherd and the Malinois in the recent global war on terror. So, and then I also have my dog. Then I also have some Labrador retrievers in my work too, because they're very often used for the bomb sniffing, the detection dog as well.
Right. Well, I was just, as we were chatting, I was going to obviously on your website here, and one, if we could, as I bring them up, maybe talk about them, and we'll go back and add in the photos later. But I think you pronounce the name Jojo. Is it Jojo?
Or Jajo.
Jajo.
Yeah, Jajo.
So share with us a little bit about what's going on with that sculpture.
Right. Well, let me back up to say, first of all, that the original 8 dogs or so, the Wounded Warrior, they were sort of everyman dog. They were general representations of stories that I had heard, and they were symbolic of that type of injury, or that the handler who they are really actually allegories to the human handlers. If you look at their injuries, they're more human than they are canine.
Right.
So these were sort of, these dogs as a man's best friend, as their companion dog, were stand-ins for the wounded veterans. They're representative of the wounded veterans. And then people began asking me if the dog was there a particular story to this or that dog. And it was at that time, about that same time, I had the dogs up at the display at the Ohio State Fair, and a doctor who was the anesthesiast on a forward operating base in Afghanistan said, I want to show you some pictures. And so he showed me some pictures of Jajo having been injured, as well as his handler coming in at the same time. His handler is still alive and surviving in Colorado, and Jajo died last year, just recently. But so I took up Jajo's story and got permission from the family, of course, because now I'm bringing real people into the discussion, and I don't want to encroach upon their privacy. So I worked a lot with the families, trying to get as much story as possible. And I want to honor the sacrifice of these K9 teams, and I can't do that for everyone. So it's more or less symbolic of others who have served with them. But I am able to tell the story of this young man who, Jajo and he were searching the perimeter. If I remember correctly, an IED was remotely set off near a haystack when the dog was checking it out, and he, he had shrapnel hit him, and so the Jojo is at the point of the explosion going off, and if you notice the helmet on his palm, he's catching the helmet of his handler, which shows the human contact at the same time. That's really the only piece that I have representing the point of impact or the point of the event. And so I would tell you this, is that Patrick Tutko was his handler, and I've been in contact with he and his wife. They were dogs. So the Dogs Project out of Colorado flew Patrick out and his wife out to the Marine Museum in Washington, D.C. area to see Jojo for the first time. And we drove out to talk to them as well. And I had heard that before that, Patrick didn't want people to know that he had a Purple Cross. And I've been in contact with him since, and it's just sort of been this unpeeling of the onion, and he's really come out, and he's been very
beautiful.
So there's been this, so at that point when I realized that more than just calling attention to the needs of the wounded veterans, this piece has been how I describe it, as an installation happening, a catharsis happening, where people come and there's great emotion. They bring a lot of emotion to them, and there's a lot of release when they see this at the same time.
Very cool.
To have a piece compared to the Vietnam Wall is just amazing to me. I mean, I don't see it in that way, but they said, a lot of people have said they haven't had that experience since they were at the Vietnam Wall.
Wow. Very cool. So how about Cooper?
Okay, Cooper. Well, what was inspired by that was Maria Godavich's book called Top Dog. And then she's written also since then books called Soldier Dogs, Doctor Dogs, and everything's about the dog. But there's a passion in that book. There's a portion of that book that I was reading in Top Dog about the story of Luca, who was the top dog, a Marine dog, who I think he's on 400 missions, and so who knows how many lives. He served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. But on his first mission in Iraq, he was with Chris Willingham, was the handler at the time, along with Luca, and Cooper was Corey D. Wine's handler was Corey D. Wines, and they were the first. That actually, so what happened? It was all about this friendship between the two dogs, the friendship between Chris Willingham and Corey Wines that were generated at this forward operating base. And then the story goes on to tell how maybe one of the early missions, they went off in different missions, and Corey and Cooper were killed in action by an IED, and they were the first K-9 team killed during the global war on terror. And here's a young man, in his 20s. My heart just went out to his father. Someone who was not going to be the way that Corey was described, and this dog Cooper, who he loved to play with this deflated ball while they were at the forward operating base. So I actually put Luca and Cooper together in a display called Over the Rainbow Bridge. And the idea here is that Cooper and Luca are reunited. Luca just died recently as well. And of course, it was the most famous dog because Luca was one of the only 62 animals that have been decorated with the Dickens Medal in England. It's a British honor, which is like the top award for animals who served for gallantry in the wars. But Luca has his medal on even when he goes to the afterlife and crosses the Rainbow Bridge. But Cooper is there meeting him briefly with the football and wanting to play football. And there's a white dove. I put a white dove or a dove on the back of the dog sometime to show that they passed on and they got their wings, so to speak.
What is the symbology, or is there now? Did Luca only have 3 legs prior to passing?
So Luca survived in the Iraq and came home, and then at that time, Chris Willingham went back to teach. Worked with the K-9 teams stateside, I believe. I think that's correct. And then, like so many of these dogs, they get 2 different tours. Luca then went on to serve in Afghanistan with a Marine, Juan Rodriguez, who was his handler in Afghanistan. And it was during a search, he found one IED, but then going to look for the secondary, that's when the secondary IED went off, and that's when Luca lost a leg. And Juan, thinking quickly, saved Luca's life by bandaging it up and taking care of him. So Luca survived, and then Luca then came back to the States. You know, the Luca was on the Today Show. Luca was a famous dog. You know, he went before Congress, but he had a lot of video time. Luca got a lot of video time with Chris Willingham telling the story of the canine teams working in Afghanistan. I met Chris. Chris came to the opening at the airport at the Marine Museum, and gave a little bit of talk. And I should spill the beans on this, but Chris was in tears when he saw the rendition of Luca that I carved. And that means a lot to me. You know, the emotions again, the release, and then all the young Marines that came over from the base, Quantico, came into the show with their dogs as well, and the dogs that were in training. And there was more testosterone in that room. I can't believe it, how much there was.
What about the Waiting to Go? There's a piece called Waiting to Go.
Right. That is my most recent. That's my most recent one, and I got that done just in time, because I had kind of in my book called Giving Form to Honor and Sacrifice, I mentioned the loss of David Simpson, who took his life due to PTSD and a lot of pain that he was having from Lyme disease. There were some other things going on, and I know that he was Air Force, and I reached out to his wife and some of his close friends to see if it would be okay if I were to tell his story, because I needed to tell the story about the pain of those who are left behind when it comes to suicide. And so I was able to complete that piece for the Air Force Museum show. And what a fine group of people there at that museum. You know, if my dogs ever find a final resting place, I think I would like it to be at that museum. You know, it was just top notch. And the foundation flew Aaron, his wife, Aaron Simpson, and 3 children, and his mother from Arizona out to see this piece for the first time.
Wow.
And I was able, still get tears. I was able to go see them and meet them. It was a wonderful time. It was very meaningful to them at the same time. But this piece, so what happened is David's friend, an older friend who is very much involved in the canine teams and supporting the canine teams, named Frank Yakovich. I forgot that name right, but from New Jersey. And if Frank sees this, he knows who I'm talking about anyway. But so Frank was able to duplicate a battle jacket of David's with the lettering, his tech sergeant emblem and all. And we have that piece laying under the dog. You know how a dog gets up on the bed and the dog always gets on top of your clothes because it's something familiar. And so here's the dog, and I put a tear in the dog's eye. It was a last minute thought. I decided to do it, and the dog's looking up. He said the dog's in a stance, and when they're not, a lot of times the German Shepherds lay on their hindquarters on the side, but this time both of the hind legs are underneath, ready to get up, sort of in an alert position. And so I have a leash, the collar on. He's laying there on top of his jacket, and the title is Waiting to Go, but there's no one at the other end of the leash. And you know, that allegory of the leash and the handler, you know, up the leash, down the leash, is a very strong allegory within the dog handlers community. But in this case, there's no one at the other end. And yes, it's probably the most moving piece that that I've done so far.
Right. Well, and I believe I saw that on your out there that how you talk about the display with the uniform top and the and the dog on top of it, kind of, like a lot of dogs do, like, hey, don't forget me, right?
Right, right. You're right.
So
You're not going to go anywhere without me as long as I'm laying on your clothes. So that's
right.
great right now.
Right. Beautiful.
It's usually
And
black,
that's just,
usually a white dog on top of black clothes.
yeah, or vice versa. Yep, you're right. And it's just so moving to hear you talk about that, because whether you're a dog lover, or you have a connection to the military or canine, whatever the case is, it's just a moving tribute to those individuals. And I wanted to talk about some of your other projects as well. Like, you have one here called Under the Flag.
Right. Well, so I'm watching a video of the Delta flight bringing the caskets home, and they're honor guard. And yeah, so yeah, back to the Wounded Warrior Dogs project. When they were first shown, what I did not know what the response was going to be, from the public, and it ended up winning in a major award in a competition, by popular vote. I did not expect that at all. But every dog, in the general story that I told with the dogs, I met every character at that display where I stood with the dogs for 19 days in Grand Rapids at Art Prize 8. And the brain injuries, and the little kids as well. A little girl came up, because I made the whole thing wheelchair accessible so people could get around. And this young lady was pushed by her father up, and then she said, "Look, Daddy, that dog's just like me." Pointing to the dog with the wheels on. Under the Flag then was one that I had. So I saw this video from the Delta airline, and following the flag draped casket was a wooden box, like maybe 24 by 30s, 40 by 30, something like that, inside. And what it said was those were the remains of the dog that was following the handler. Well, since then, there's some discussion as to whether that was actually a box of Korean War veterans' bones. I don't know. But that's what I went up on that. And that's what moved me emotionally. I said, I got to put this dog in a proper box and under the flag. So there's a suggestion then that Wounded Warrior Dog number 7 is actually a flag with the dog inside. And so that was at the center of the displays. And when you put that at the center of the displays, and all the other dogs, surviving dogs, are honoring it in that way, it's a very moving position for the piece to be in. And so I was standing there, and a woman, a flight attendant, came up in uniform, because they had a lot of layovers there at the Grand Plaza Hotel there, the Amway in Grand Rapids. And she came up to me, and I lost it when she said that. She said, "I'm a flight attendant, and I bring the bodies home." It's the whole circle. The whole thing was completed.
So flashback 2017.
Right. Flashback was the dog with the doves on the back, and the black dove and the white dove. And I had another Doberman. I said, I'm going to have to tell the story. This was sort of the story that told it about David Simpson, in a way, before I had done Robbie L96. And by the way, I try to keep all the numbers with the dogs and try to, place their license plate, it's their registration. But that also individualizes the dogs even more, because there's a lot of Rexes and a lot of Kings and a lot of Robbies and so forth. So it was just a way of doing honor. And I try to include that number on the dog somehow when I can. But in the general sense, I let flashback just represent PTSD for all. There's no service ribbon on him, so it's sort of all wars, the PTSD, whether it was shell shock, the different names that they had for the Vietnam syndrome, the different names that they had for these for the PTSD at the time.
Sure. You talked about, you mentioned really quick, one of your works, Afghanistan 2015. You mentioned the dog with the chair. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Or with
The,
the wheels, sorry, not
yeah,
with
the
the chair.
wheelchair. Right. So again, this is where I'm seeing these. Now, if you know, the wheelchair is more of the human-sized wheels that they would have had, almost racing wheels. And I would say, well, at the time, the president of the Vietnam Dog Handlers Association was a fellow by the name of John Langley. And he said, the trouble with your dogs is that they're too beautiful. They don't represent the dog coming back from, this is just a side story. They don't represent the dog coming back from the field and being all roughed up and beat up and everything. And so then that's when I did the way back. The dog that's making his way back. He's all scarred and beat up. And in fact, the one behind me was a commission for a veterans clinic out in Idaho that I'm creating, which is sort of a takeoff of the way back. So I try to find these. I'm going to bounce back now. This is back to when I was teaching college. I'm all over the place, so I usually make my loop back to where I was at the beginning.
Sure.
So the wheelchair, that would be Wounded Warrior Dog number 2, a Malinois, and with its one eye is missing or is blinded and it's swollen. And no, that was Wounded Warrior number 1. Wounded Warrior number 2 is the one, just strictly the one in the wheelchair. And the idea is in Afghanistan, a lot of times what was happening is that the IEDs were being set off under the carriers and soldiers were losing their legs. And so that's why I call that Afghanistan versus the side injury from a roadside bomb, which was Iraq for the Wounded Warrior Dog number 1.
Right. And actually that's a one, right beside it, it's kind of missing an ear and a part of the body and a leg.
And I met the soldiers with the metal plate, and I met this Marine was standing with his leg, the same leg missing next to the piece, and I became friends with him. We were taking pictures and so forth. It's just crazy.
Isn't that just fascinating to me? Not Forgotten 2015.
Right. This is the favorite of the Vietnam Dog Handlers. And so, with the German Shepherd, and I showed the way back, Not Forgotten, and Wounded Warrior Dog, and from Iraq, I showed those first 3 together. I was invited down to the Vietnam Dog Handlers reunion down in Nashville in 2015, I believe it was, yeah. And I just set them up on a table for the guys to see, and they were all taking selfies and hugging and said, "Look just like my dog." And I mean, I understand that. And then they would show me pictures of their dog and young men, shirtless young men, they're in their prime of the Vietnam War with their dog by their sides. And I'm glad I put that little insignia said, and not the POW insignia and Not Forgotten, because they were forgotten. And the thing that most people cannot get over with that piece is that 4,000 dogs were left behind in Vietnam. And that is where the laws came about. And a lot of the players in the later pieces, such as Jason Voss who had his Cece, the chocolate lab, was kind of based upon his dog, who ended up being up from Grand Rapids. He went before Congress. I'm sure Chris Willingham went before Congress, and they got these laws changed to where the dogs now come back. They either come back, if the soldier does not survive, the dogs now are coming back to live with the families. And the sad thing about that, as an aside, is that when the dog dies, it's like they've lost their son or their daughter a second time. But they had a part of their son and daughter with them for that, for that remaining time of 7 years or so that the dog might survive after service. Now, where were you? I might have.
So we were talking about Not Forgotten, that piece, but I was gonna and it was interesting. You bring that up. You bring that up about that, the Not Forgotten piece. So it's interesting because it brings up. I wasn't aware that that back during that era, there was 4,000 or so dogs that weren't brought back home.
Well, and since then I've met so many of the Vietnam dog handlers. A fellow named David Adams came up to the Air Force Museum. They drove from around Harrisburg in Pennsylvania out to the Air Force Museum just to see this display, in Dayton, Ohio. So they came in, and he told me more stories about how, and I keep gathering these stories about. He was actually in Taiwan. I guess he wasn't supposed to be there or somewhere, but as they were closing down the dog base there, they were euthanizing the dogs.
Oh.
And then burying the dogs. It was the hardest task that he had to do, to bury the dogs. And in the morning, he would go out and find the graves were dug up because the villagers were going out and digging up the dogs to eat them.
Oh, sure.
And then they tried to dig false graves, but somewhere they were watching them, and only the graves that contained the dogs were dug up, so they knew that someone was watching. I mean, okay, the Vietnam dog handlers, talk about PTSD and that sadness of having to leave that companion behind. Can you imagine how hard that would be? The double whammy. And they said, well, why did they do that? People can't get their mind around that, putting these dogs down. And, they were equipment, they had their numbers on, and there was equipment that was left behind. And of course, my own personal feeling is that what would you expect? How would you expect people to treat the dogs? Look at how they treated the veterans.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a sad piece to understand, but I guess if there's a positive that comes out of any of that is the laws that came out that now protect. Yep, I guess that's a positive that came out of all that. It's just a sad aspect of war, right? I don't think anybody wins in any of it, but a beautiful tribute, no doubt.
When I started these dogs, I had literally, maybe I'm too used to the world. I don't know. I wasn't on Facebook yet, so I had no idea how popular the dogs were. And I didn't get on Facebook until after I started this project. But little did I know how the movie Max came out a couple months after I had created my first dog, and so this was just all this dog and the military dog working in stories. Megan Ryan, these stories were coming about, and since then I have just been embraced by this large dog community, canine community out there. I had no idea how popular they would be, and I suppose that the popular vote had a lot to do with that popularity at the time.
Right. What about your piece called the Sniffer or Sniffer?
That would be Cece.
Okay.
Jason Bosch's dog in Grand Rapids, and I said, why did it? Well, I wanted to do something so I get chocolate, so I could get some walnut into that display.
Yep.
So chocolate lab, it worked perfectly for that. And it was the only dog I put in the wall, and with his nose up in the air and his little tongue just kind of slightly hanging out like he's sniffing for molecules in the air, as a bomb detection dog. That's now, so I said, why did I do a chocolate lab? So I did a chocolate lab brown bomb sniffing dog, and up came CC, and I kind of remember in the past the story that was published on all the media about the return of CC and big reunion with Jason Bosch. So
with CC on that sculpture, what is the significance with the, I guess it's more on the lateral side it would be on the left side of the body as I look at it as the photo. What is the significance with that detail? It almost looks like
CC. And so see, that's the thing. CC was never damaged or anything like that. But what I did is that one side is full, the other side is wasted with ribs showing, and a brace on the leg, which shows that it was a side impact from a bomb. A bomb went off,
sure.
The dog was stripping.
Okay, very cool. And then the last one, of course, we haven't talked about, and I've been kind of purposely kind of holding off on this one, but until the end. But blessing and mercy. Blessing and mercy. So kind of
So
the
that's
culmination.
sort of the idea. Then, if you notice, there's no prosthetic. So here's this dog. He's learned to live with a stub, and it's like that's an older guy's idea. There's a certain amount of I've lived my life. I've passed over. I'm free. Of course, he'll get the stub replaced. He'll have his leg replaced when he goes across the rainbow
Right.
bridge. Um, I don't know where my theology is in that, but a lot of people, believe that. Okay, so uh, it's blessing and mercy. That's the World War II generation. What they call the greatest generation. He's learned to live. He's accepted, and he has a blessing and he has mercy as he's passed on. So it's the World War II generation that is going on, and this, of course, the dog represents the World War II. The ribbon is the South Pacific ribbon of World War II.
Right.
This sort of
Well,
blessing and mercy is sort of at peace, completely being at peace. No more pain, no more suffering.
when you're doing these sculptures, James, is it something that you feel that these sculptures kind of take on a personality of their own, or do they speak to you in some way where you work in some of the character within the wood?
Well, I think there's always some of that. I'm not sure how much of my own character is in the work, uh, because what I'm finding is that it's just like the whole display. I didn't know what I had. I didn't know what I had done until the viewers and the veterans and the families, they all come together, and then that the reaction to what they're seeing, that is why it's more like a happening. That is a real time, not theater, because I mean it's real. It's not a faked emotion, because that's when the piece is actually completed. And there are times when I say, "Oh my God, what have I done? It's gotten away from me in some ways." And so, as I'm standing there, I sort of become a priest and I become a confessor sometimes. I was never caught out to do that sort of thing. I never expected that. But I genuinely listen. And of course, then in the listening, there can be more stories that come about from the listening. But I think that my reward is hearing the good that these have done for people, and that's a justification. That's very rewarding to me. It makes it. When I did this first group, I had no idea. You got crates in my basement. What am I going to do? And then now they're locked into, of course, with the coronavirus thing happening now. They're in lockdown at the Gerald Ford Museum right now, and they're supposed to go do you want to know where they're going next? I can go ahead and tell you where.
Absolutely. Where are they going next?
So now they're supposed to be down at the National Infantry Museum in Columbus, Georgia, for the summer, and we're trying to decide when when the DoD is going to be able to open up the museum and have everything sprayed down. So I'm not sure yet. This is the great unknown, is how they're going to make the move. I'm a high risk person, so I have to be very careful about this. We're going to have to make the move from Grand Rapids down to Columbus, Georgia, and then the following year, actually, we're going to put up another related display at the AKC Museum in New York for Fleet Week, that would be in the spring, Lord willing, that everything's cleared up there, and then have a lot of rebound at the AK Museum. And there's a conflict where two places want the dogs at the same time, but the original group will be going down to the Upcountry History Museum down in Greenville, South Carolina, for the summer of 2021. And then for that fall, they're going to the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas. So, like I say, who knows all this was all this is happening.
Wow. So so as an artist, as somebody that is, storytelling and telling other stories through your sculptures and everything else, who is somebody that has inspired you doing what you do?
Oh boy. Um, with this, I don't know. I really haven't thought about that. I guess God. I don't
Okay,
know.
sure.
You know, uh, Jesus. That's the ministry side of the thing. That's the compassion side of things. Now, I don't know if I was not if I was not a theist. I don't know whether I would still have this compassion or not. But I think, like it came from my father. Yeah, I suppose my father, in a way, would be an answer to your question. My earthly father, my heavenly father, so to speak, is that, this compassion, this is something that you need to do. It is a ministry of some sort. A lot of times, when you ask me that question, there aren't very many artists that I model after, because, a lot of artists tend to be self-involved and, geniuses. And I've never seen myself, I never seen myself as that. I'm blessed. I am blessed with an opportunity. I am blessed with a wife who had a good job so I could be poor for a while, make my art. A lot of this stuff would not have happened without the grace of God and a wife who worked her butt off on my behalf, most of our career.
Very well said. Very, very well said by a man who's been married for married quite a number of years.
It's 1970. Yeah, we recently had I guess it was our 50th.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, I guess it was.
Yeah.
And you
So
know what? Even after the virus, we're still together. You know, we are still getting along. We get short with each other sometimes, but I head out to the studio. She doesn't see me for part of the day, and everything's fine.
So what's new for James? What's new on the docket? I know you have your latest project, The Way Back.
Yeah,
That
the
was
way
your
back,
latest.
and then this one is called Soldier On, and it's a very similar piece to the way back, but it was done for a clinic dealing with veterans who are coming back with a number of injuries. But it's by a doctor commissioned me as a logo for their office. It's going to become their symbol of as making their way back. And in fact, the clinic, I believe it's a clinic, if I'm not using the word, it's called Soldiering On Veteran Services. And so I just titled this piece Soldier On. And then I have a couple of memorial dogs that I've been working on where with the military working dog has deceased, and they are able to put the flag on the back of the dog, as well as some of the dog's favorite toys, or wear the dog's collar. It becomes sort of a stand-in memorial for the K-9 team at the same time. And my big thing is garden. With this virus thing, it's been so wet out here. I'm waiting to. In the year before I started the dogs, we had this garden charity, and we were able to give about 2,300 pounds of food to the food pantry. We have some nice bottom ground where I do my like a truck garden down there. And then in 2015, I got so busy with the dogs, I let the gardening slide. But now with this virus thing coming back, and people I think are going to need some food, I'm waiting for it to dry out to where I can get my garden planted now. So it's making dogs and gardening right
now. Well, the noble causes either way, right?
Yeah.
So, well, James, thanks so much for being on the show today. It was not only educational, but very eye-opening. Your work, obviously, this is changing lives. So, I'd be remiss if I didn't say continue doing what you're doing. And I know you do it from the heart. So saying, as long as I got breath still in these lungs, I'll continue doing it. But it's interesting is I wanted to ask one more question, because you talked about, working with maples and different things and I know you do a lot of hand carving and different tools, but
Right.
About how long does it take you to, from start to finish, do a typical project on average?
I would say, of course, every time I do something, I learn something. I keep adding more on because I'm trying new things. But it's about 160 hours to 200 hours for a piece, and that's even having carved for 40 years. So if I had never carved that, I don't know, exactly what I would. Now, most people think, I'm with a chisel and I'm chiseling away like that. And I do have chisels like that, but I don't use them much anymore. It's called get her done. I have die grinders, I have angle grinders and Dremel tools and rotary tools. And I leave the chisels for the fine detailing in some things. And, and for the romance, the nostalgia using those tools sometimes, but it's more like, get it done. Probably about half my time of that 160 hours is hand sanding though. And I tape all my fingers and I just go on there and that takes about half the time. It is labor of love, but when you put that first coat of clear finish on and all that grain comes up, if you prepared the surface appropriately, that's the reward. That's one of those little rewards along the way to see that rich, deep color of the wood come about. And I try not to paint the wood if I can. But I will say with cedar, I bleach it and I burn it. And that's how I get the colors in the dog. I use a torch. And
Okay.
The highlights are done with wood beads as well. But there's a hierarchy of woods for me. I'm sort of snobbish about some of the woods. Walnut, I don't like to bother. Walnut will get back at me and give me cold allergies type feelings. And so in the flu season and the COVID-19 season, I have to know why was my nose stuffing up. So I have to watch the species of wood sometimes. I love cherry, and I've just started working more and more with basswood, which I can color. And I have every once in a while I'll do sycamore, which is again sycamore, perfect color for the Malinois. And then for the German Shepherds, the bigger dogs, I use cedar because it's a lighter wood, and the chocolate lab, of course, the walnut. That's kind of my rationalization of how I use the wood.
Nice. Well, James, thanks so much again for being a guest on the show. It's been an honor and a privilege to be able to chat with you today and share your labor of love, your works with us and the listeners. And we look forward to keeping tabs on you and see what you have coming up here in the future.
Oh, great. And can I mention my website?
Absolutely.
JamesMellick.com. And of course, there's a store there for posters and T-shirts. That has to sort of supports the mission as well.
And we'll make sure that website address is up on the screen as well. And then, of course, we'll make sure all the photos, as we talked about each project, will be all up on there as well. And then social media, where can they find you?
I have two sites. One is the group called the Wounded Warrior Dogs Project Group, and then the Wounded Warrior Dogs Project, which is a page. It's an open page, and it's a lot easier. You can just relate and exchange ideas on that page as well.
Nice. Well, thank you so much again, James, and hope you and your wife have a tremendous week. And thanks for taking time to chat with us today.
Great. Thank you very much. It's been a joy.